Hey there. Are you an artist, a creative person who wants big things for their life, but is always broke or always frustrated with the demands of making money, having a job? Well, look, the world will tell you not to dream big, right? You're just supposed to accept the burden that's on you and shoulder it. And they'll tell you that if you want to travel the world or you want to have a lot of money, that those are selfish desires, those are greedy desires. And wealthy people, they're all greedy capitalists, right? And they're destroying the world, oppressing you. Well, I want to tell you, you're allowed to want those things. You're allowed to have those desires. And it isn't just selfish and greedy. But also, it's okay if it is. If it's selfish and greedy, I'm going to tell you that for this minute, during this video, give yourself permission to have some selfish desires, okay? If someone says it's shallow, that's a shallow goal, having a lot of money. Just ignore them, okay? Because what most of them are doing is pretending that they don't want those things. And they're justifying that pretense by judging the people who either have those things or want those things. And I'm going to talk to you today about how if you stop judging the people who have those things or want those things, then you get to stop judging the part of yourself that wants those things. And in doing so, guess what? You're actually going to attract the kind of wealth that you want. And I don't just mean having a lot of money. I mean real wealth. I mean having the life that would really be worth living. So I've got some notes here I'm going to be glancing at because I'm going to do this all in one take. And I don't even know for sure if the camera's still recording. That's how much I'm just going for it right now. I'm up in a tree. I got, 30 or so minutes of good sunlight here. You can see the sun is going down. And I'm going to do it in one take. And you know why? Because I'm demonstrating that there's a type of wealth in simply being present to the moment, enjoying the process. And in doing that, you can actually build a multi-million-dollar network. Yes, I'm not just making this up, and I will explain exactly what I mean. Now, having this attitude that it's okay to want a lot of money means you can actually see how you can be of tremendous benefit to the world, and that having a lot of money can be of great benefit to your ability to give more to the world, to give your gift to the world. Now, I don't have a lot of money right now, but you know what? I have sculpted a life where I have a lot of time freedom, which is on its own a form of incredible wealth. In fact, it would be better to never have a lot of money, but to have a lot of time freedom, than to have millions of dollars, but be tied to something you really don't want to be doing, and to not have the freedom to have the kinds of relationships you want, to go to the places you want to go. So we're going to ask some questions about what wealth really means to us. But we're not going to deny that money can play a role in that. If you have a lot of money, that can be what allows you to have more time freedom, location freedom, relationship freedom. So, on the other hand, we want to see that if you're so focused on making it, quote unquote, in the sense of having a lot of money or being a successful business person, then you can't necessarily step back and see the whole picture. So I don't want you to get isolated to either side of this picture, the side that says getting rich is bad, or the side that says, I just want to get rich. I want you to see the whole picture, because if you can step back and not just be focused on your own wealth, but actually also empathize with other people's struggles and other people's incomplete worldviews and their ineffective, counterproductive attitudes. And you empathize instead of just judging it and saying, oh, the person who wants a lot of money is bad, or oh, the person who's just judging rich people is bad or wrong. And you can empathize with their entire worldview and why it is what it is. It's going to be much more effective in you achieving the freedom that you want. So let me explain. I am looking to meet you where you're at, right? I'm acknowledging your desire. I'm not asking you to deny it. So I empathize with the fact that maybe the life you want looks a little different than the life that you have right now. Now, because I've validated that, we can now work from there. We can work with the reality of the situation. Now, that's what actually works in the world of business, right? It's what actually works in unlocking your creative power. Because when you deny aspects of yourself, you fragment yourself. And a fragmented self is seeing the world through a very limited lens. It's constricting your mental bandwidth, constricting your creative bandwidth, which means you're not going to be as effective at solving problems or seeing solutions, creating ways to dissolve a problem, or seeing problems as puzzles instead of problems. If you're creative, you have an expanded ability to solve problems also for other people. And if you can solve other people's problems, guess what? That's what business is all about. The most successful business people solve other people's problems. Now, you could argue that they solve problems sometimes in a way that's not optimal and that has harmful side effects. But we're not going to go there right now. The idea is, if you don't like the capitalists who are poisoning the people, the goal is to outcompete them. Solve problems in your way. So, the alternative is to be in the mode of feeling like the world owes you something. And like you need to really just take what you need, right? You got to get an employer who gives you a job with a decent wage, and you got to give as little as possible for as much of a wage as you can get. And you're just trading your time for money, and then go home and don't think about the job, because why would you? That's now your personal time. So people have this attitude that their employers are oppressing and extorting them, and that they should just get what they can. They should squeeze as much wage out of their employer as they can, because that's all the employer is doing to them, is squeezing as much labor out of them as they can. And it's a very taker mentality all around, right? Everyone's just wanting to take. When the whole purpose of this whole game is profit, in the sense that we all have more than we had before we started, right? So the capitalist enterprise has done a lot of good, right? You've got lights that stay on for years on end. You've got toilets that flush, and you don't have to think about waste disposal. And it's a system that runs pretty smooth because a lot of problems have been solved. And store shelves are full of food. You don't have to do a lot of hard farm labor like most of your ancestors. You don't have to go hunting or gathering. Okay, I get it. It's a two-sided situation, and you can also argue that you can argue the other side. I get it. But look, people who say, if I was the richest person in the world, I would solve world hunger. I would just feed all the poor. There's a lot of things they're not understanding, right? First off, if helping people was as simple as throwing money on the ground and telling food to grow, then world hunger would be solved. okay? Wealthy people generally know that it's not quite as simple as that, and a lot of them are more charitable than most people think, right? A lot of wealthy people, they're constantly actually doing charitable work, but charities have a lot of bureaucracy, so you don't just want to give your money to any charity. And moving money costs money, right? So it's a pain in the butt just to try to do good, even if you have lots of money. Plus, a lot of the people who have a lot of money did a lot of good to get the money. So let's not be one-sided about it, because although you might be correct to some degree and you can point fingers at particular wealthy people, it's not doing you any good. And what I'm trying to do here is to help you do yourself some good. Remember, I said, go ahead and be selfish, okay? We want your problems to be solved. We don't want you to just be oppressed by an employer and shoulder this burden and be told, just be grateful, right? That's not what I'm telling you. I'm telling you there's more to life than that. And you can decide to act in a way that profits you more than what your employer pays you in a wage. And you can decide to profit the other people around you, right? If you're creating something of value, not just doing unskilled labor at a fast food restaurant, then you're actually improving the world, and that is profit, right? An improved world is profit. Now, this attitude of needing to take comes from the feeling of not having enough, right? Having to get more money or have more freedom is part of a mentality that was taught to you to disempower you, because basically if you look at the history of the education system, which I'm not going to go deep into, you could look at the history of the education system, and it's kind of grim. But the brutal reality is we were trained to be slaves, right? Now again, someone can get triggered by anything that I'm saying here. Everything that I'm saying can be taken as a one-sided statement that doesn't take the whole picture into an account. Well, look, it takes time to say things in a way that takes the whole picture into an account. So yes, plenty of historical slaves had it far worse than I ever have. I get it. I'm not telling you that we don't have some level of privilege to change jobs or, things that some historical slaves didn't have. But when I say we were trained to be slaves, what I mean is that we were trained to be obedient to authority figures, right? Of course, we were trained to obey our parents. Then we were trained to obey our school teachers and principals. And then we were trained to obey our employers. Well, to give correct answers is how we were told we have to do well in school, right? Don't have the wrong answers. So creativity was divorced from the practical subjects, right? Math was a drag for many of us. It was just about formulaic memorization and following a procedure. It wasn't about finding a solution to a problem, right? We were told, here's a math problem, and here's the formula to solve it. But it wasn't a creative endeavor. Science as well. Although we studied all these great scientists who, such as, I won't name names because again, people are going to get annoyed and tell me some bad thing about somebody. But scientists solved problems through experimentation, right? Inventors, people who uncovered knowledge that now benefits all of us, profits all of us. They experimented. They didn't just start with a correct answer that they found in a textbook, right? They were wrong a bunch. They failed a bunch. Science is a process of falsification. So art class was pretty much the only place where creativity was often really encouraged for most of us. And even then, often it was very formulaic. And it was contained, separate from all the real learning, right? And we were taught to see work as an essential burden, a necessary evil, something that we had to do despite the fact that we were doomed to dislike it. A 40-year career after you finally get out of school was waiting for you so that you could finally retire when you got old, when your health was now failing you. So you could get good grades and go to post-secondary, specialize, get a job, follow the rules, satisfy your boss, and slave away your time for an hourly wage and believe that your hours were worth a dollar amount. Not that you could create limitless amounts of value and potentially change the world with solutions to problems, but that the solutions were already here. Just follow the rules, follow the formulas, and get your dollar amount. Well, you could put minimal effort in at a low skill job as well if you didn't do well in school and still just be expected to follow the formula, right? Sort the cans at the bottle depot or whatever it is and call it a good enough life. Well, here's what they didn't teach you about learning. And this is going to get a little abstract, so fair warning. But there's research from a Dutch psychologist named Adrian de Groot. No idea if I'm saying that correctly. But Adrian de Groot studied chess masters. And at first he thought that they must have photographic memories, right? They must be thinking way more moves ahead than novices. Well, he was wrong. He was wonderfully wrong. Because chess masters don't tend to calculate many more moves ahead than a novice. They're actually intuiting higher level patterns, and their perception is blocking out all kinds of moves that wouldn't lead to optimal outcomes. In the same way that when you know how to play chess, you don't see moves that are illegal moves, that are invalid moves. You just don't notice them, right? You don't think about moving your pawns diagonally without taking an opponent's piece because pawns don't move that way. Well, the chess masters would see much higher level versions of that, moves that technically were allowed, but were no good. They just would tend to notice whole blocks of higher level patterns. And of course, when you realize how many possibilities there are in a chess game, you realize this is absolutely necessary because 4 moves into a chess game, there's like 70,000 possible outcomes. In a 40 move game of chess, there's like 80 million possible outcomes. Or maybe I have that wrong. It might be 80 billion. It's an insane number of possible outcomes. You can't memorize all of those, which means to brute force your way through the game, through computation, isn't actually very smart. It's just memorization of formula, and you're not going to beat a master with memorization of formula. So, real deep learning happens through what's called non-monotonic cognitive change. You can look that up. It's a fascinating concept, but it means that revolutionary shifts in consciousness take place. It's not about just adding more information. Old information has to be overridden by new insights, such that a whole paradigm shift takes place. A revolution in consciousness is what leads to actual genius level outcomes. Now, our education system rewards memorization, not paradigmatic transformation, right? So you were taught to fear being wrong instead of learning that mistakes are what provide the most valuable feedback for growth. This is why sometimes you hear that C students often become more successful entrepreneurs than A students. Not that all C students are likely to do well. Some of them are just purely undisciplined, but some of them were rebellious, whereas a lot of straight A students were very much made to be very obedient. And if they didn't get straight A's, their parents would punish them. So they were punished out of experimenting. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own very experimental journey and personal descent into broke, starving artist hell. And I lived for many years in a state where, first off, I had chronic pain. And there's reasons for that I'll go into. But I suffered from a lot of pain in my upper back, sometimes severe pain. And I was caught in a spiral of smoking weed all the time, feeling quite depressed, and being plagued by this pain. Now, I told myself that my use of cannabis, which at this point I would say was an abuse of the plant, I said that it was medicinal use to counteract the pain that I was in. But honestly, the truth is, it was mostly just a coping mechanism. And it actually sometimes just made me lethargic and more achy than if I wasn't smoking. Now, I get it. Weed can be pain relieving. So I'm not looking to cast a harsh judgment on anyone who's using cannabis medicinally, okay? Again, don't take anything that I'm saying as a one-sided judgment against anybody. I'm telling you about my own journey. And for me, smoking weed was an acceptance of a good enough life. Now, it wasn't actually good enough. It was full of suffering. But it was, quote unquote, good enough from the mind of someone who's just coping with life. And the other thing is, you could look at it and say, it's not that bad, so it's fine. And in some ways, that's what makes weed the most dangerous drug, okay? Because most people who, if they were to try heroin, and I haven't, so I don't know what it's like, but most people who have a healthy social life and aren't in pain, maybe they do morphine in the hospital. I have been in that situation, and they don't end up out on the streets desperate for more. Okay? So with weed, a lot of people, they can hold down a job, they can seem like a functional human, and yet their life is about 10% what it could be. Their social skills are at about 10% capacity. Their ability to remember and deal with complex information, 10% capacity. So you might say, well, it's not that bad. No one's stopping me with an intervention. I am here to tell you that I don't want you to accept the not that bad life. I want you to accept that you have a potential great life waiting for you, and that you can live a life of true wealth. So that's what we're here to talk about. How to live a life of true wealth. Let me adjust my seat here. This tree isn't particularly cozy, but it is nice up here, and there's good lighting. It's part of the purpose of being up here. So I don't want you to accept good enough or not that bad, all right? Because to be honest with you, that's terrible. And that's not good enough. Now, I went to university for a time. I was struggling with the back pain, and I learned a lot about how to write and how to speak and how to study. But I was struggling, and I didn't see how this was going to lead to a viable career, because I thought, even if this opens up some great career opportunity for me, I'm still in immense pain all the time. And to be frank, I didn't know how I was going to get through life at times. I was in despair a lot of the time. And when people said, it seems like that weed might be a bit of a problem, I would kind of be angry at them because they didn't know what I was going through, right? And I would think it's not that bad compared to being in pain all the time. But this is this way that we justify and rationalize to ourselves and make excuses. But I was much more capable of dealing with the pain and healing from it when I got rid of the weed. And I'll tell you about that process. Now, most artists, they don't stay broke because they lack talent, right? They stay broke because they're running from their shadow. And this is a term from Carl Jung. You've probably seen his quotes online, like Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. It's a famous quote, but he wrote many books and talked very in depth about the topic of the unconscious mind and what it consists of. Now, avoiding the psychological work required to turn pain into creative power is what will keep you in a state where you just need to cope by eating comfort foods, watching Netflix, complaining about your job, smoking weed, whatever it is. Now, I was living proof of it, okay? Despite the many years that I spent learning how to be a woodworker when I dropped out of school, thinking at least woodworking will keep me in motion instead of sitting hunched over desks and carrying textbooks, might be better for my back. And I enjoy woodworking. It's a passion, it's my art, but I thought I'd make it a business. And I developed a skill set, I developed an artistic vision, I made some beautiful pieces of furniture and carvings, but I was broke. And I always had to have a job to prop up for my woodworking business, which cost me more than it made me, generally, or as much as it made me. And I wasn't just broke financially, I was spiritually broken down. I was physically broken. And I had all the external components of an artist with potential for great success, but none of the internal integration required to make it sustainable. So I'm telling you that your suffering holds the key to freeing the true creative self that could build real wealth. And I'm going to explain how. Now, first off, shortly before I dropped out of school, well, a while before, in 2016, Jordan Peterson became quite well known, and over the following years became very famous. And if that name triggers you, don't worry. I'm also going to trigger some of his fans here. I've met him twice. I've been backstage with Jordan Peterson a couple of times and talked to him. And I have a lot of respect for the guy. But yes, he's a human being. And we're not going to dwell on criticizing individual human beings in this talk. That's not the point of this. Now, I'm also not looking to appease anyone whose mind is captivated, or you might even say whose mind is possessed by one dogmatic side or the other of a particular issue. Okay? Now, you can both appreciate someone's contribution and be critical of aspects of them. So you can see the good in a category of people and also acknowledge their human flaws. All right? Now, that said, if you only acknowledge their flaws from your point of view, then you're inevitably missing something. At least you're missing why it is that they see the world the way that they do, instead of just they're bad, or whatever version in your head of harsh judgment of them that you have. Now, look, the point of this isn't about the role of Jordan Peterson, okay? The reason I bring him up is totally different. It's because in some of his talks, he mentioned his friend, Charles Joseph, an Indigenous woodcarver here on the west coast of British Columbia. Now, at this time, when I was in school, I was studying some Indigenous art history. And much of the class I was in was focused on the Canadian government's history of banning the cultural practices of the Indigenous peoples. Their potlatch ceremonies were outlawed. Some of their sacred ceremonies were made illegal. Now, I realized that Charles Joseph, this woodcarver, lived fairly close to me. And so I reached out to him. We had a good phone call, and he invited me to his home. He welcomed me into his home, treated me with great generosity, showed me a lot about his artistic process, and over the years we became good friends. But what was most striking to me in my getting to know Charles was, although he was really in touch with his creative power, he was making beautiful things, he had an incredibly traumatic childhood. His life was very difficult. And he endured things in the residential school system, unspeakable traumas. Yet here he was, creating works of beauty and power, free from the addictions of his youth. And he had found his creative agency. He had tuned in to a life of soulful purpose. He carved masks and totem poles. He did a 53-foot tall totem pole that went in front of the Montreal Museum of Fine Art. Panels and canoes. And these works of art, they weren't distractions to escape from his pain. They were expressions of the transformation of that pain into something meaningful, joyful. And they were gifts to the world, crafted from the emotional labor that he worked through to heal, from facing his shadow. There were some particular works of art from him, masks, that were very dramatic bird masks, like a 5-foot-long raven beak or the crooked beak mask, that were part of a tradition among his people called the Hamatsa ceremony. Young men among his tribe would be initiated as Hamatsa, and they would learn certain chants and dances, and they would be sent out into the woods alone for several days or even weeks. And it's kind of a secretive society, so a lot of the anthropological work may or may not be accurate, so I won't try to accurately portray the Hamatsa society's rituals, but the young men would basically be encountering mythological man-eating bird spirits in the woods and becoming possessed by them. Now, in some sense, they were confronting the monstrous aspects of themselves. And by the time they rejoined the tribe, which would be in ceremony, the rest of the tribe wouldn't see them for that time until they're holding a potlatch, and the initiate would come into the ceremony house dancing and enacting this wild, monstrous part of themselves, scooping the people dramatically into their big bird beak mouth, and eventually becoming sort of tamed by the tribe to re-establish integration with the community. Now, what that is embodying a powerful universal truth. The most personal things are often the most universal, and deliberately confronting your shadow, it empowers you in ways that denying it cannot. Now, you can integrate your shadow. Instead of fracturing yourself, you integrate your shadow into the whole of your psyche in a way that allows you to be of benefit to the whole community. Whereas denying the shadow, fragmenting the self, causes you to project judgments onto others. It causes you to bring about unpleasant circumstances through these psychological complexes. Now, that's a whole kind of deep topic for another day, but the point is, shadow work is a big part of healing your psyche and can be a big part of healing your mind. Okay, now let's get to the financial wealth, because I don't want you to stay a broke artist. Now, just last year, I made it my decision to make healing this chronic pain problem my full-time job. And it was during this period of deep shadow work that I discovered Dan Koe, who many of you may or may not be familiar with. And his message of creating digital products on the internet, providing limitless leverage, it hit me like lightning, because I'd spent all this time making physical products out of wood that you can build once and sell once. Whereas he was teaching that through a practice of writing, you can solve problems in your own life and then in the lives of others, and build once and sell twice, or sell hundreds or thousands of times. And he had years where in a single year he made $2 million, $4 million, and he's made millions of dollars through basically writing on the internet. Now, I was inspired by his message, and his philosophy very much aligned with what I was learning about Jungian individuation, this integration of the psyche, integrating all aspects of yourself into a coherent whole, such that any part reflects the whole. See, Dan had this idea that you are the niche, and instead of trying to contort yourself into someone else's business model or find one single marketable topic, you can still niche down and focus on a particular topic, but through the lens of your entire personality and your specific combination of interests and experiences can be integrated to monetize your whole unique worldview. Now, you find out what this is by practicing writing. Now that it's getting dark, the mosquitoes are coming out, so it'll be tricky to hold the camera and the notes here, but we'll see how it goes. Now, your personal uniqueness, it's not something to overcome so that you can squeeze yourself into some box. Whatever primary topic you cover as your niche, you'll do it in a unique way, right? So I discovered by making a topic tree, as Dan suggested, looking at all of my many interests, that I wanted to write about unblocking your creative power. Now, I called my newsletter The Unblocked Carver because I was also interested and am interested in Taoism, Zen Buddhism, and there's this Zen concept of the uncarved block. Now, I played with that and switched it around and said, I'm the unblocked carver because also I'm a wood carver, right? So I'm combining Zen, Taoism, psychology, depth psychology, mythology, writing. My first career as a child was in magic. I've told that story elsewhere, but I was a performing magician for 5 years. And my interest in art therapy, wood carving, I combined all these things and started writing about them. And for the first time in my life, I saw a path where I could monetize my unique knowledge, worldview, and personality instead of trying to squeeze into a conventional business model. Now, this was quite a profound shift because I went from trying to be marketable to attracting the market that valued what I could most passionately offer. Now, I'll tell you about what this led to, but first, I'll be brutally honest about what went on with my woodworking business, because for 4 years, I invested heavily in my education, access to shops, materials, tools, and I was quite proud of the skill set that I developed. But since the business generally cost me as much as it made me, I realized how low leverage it was. The amount of work required to make artisan-level, hand-carved furniture and market it and sell it and take care of clients, well, it would be difficult to justify compared to just working for somebody else and getting a wage. Now, finding people willing to buy high-value handmade items is pretty challenging. And even if I was successful at it, I'd likely be spending just as much time as I would at a labor job, making only a little bit more money, if that. So the leverage problem was clear, right? Physical products require continuous labor output. And there's no build once, sell twice with handcrafted furniture. So I decided woodworking would be my passion project, my art form. And I'd create one high-end piece of furniture per year, put a high price tag on it, and mostly just enjoy it in my own home. Art for art's sake, not for business. But you still need to solve the money problem, right? So, my first attempt at digital leverage was a web design course, because I learned web design to build my woodworking website. That's oakmoss.ca if you want to check out my wood art. Oakmoss.ca. OAKMOSS.ca. So I called this web design course the Web Dev Rebellion, and I already had the skills from building my woodworking website, but I realized this was a fairly high value skill and people would pay to learn it. And I made a bit of money. I taught some web design, met some cool people. And during that, I went on a desert trip. I escaped the Canadian winter by going down to California, Nevada, Arizona. Had a wild adventure. I've also written of that and spoken of that elsewhere. Happened to actually get to meet Dan Koe in person and have him help me strategize a little bit of what I was building. Now, when I got home from the desert trip, I realized that I wasn't that passionate about web design. And so that wasn't really going to work out. I sat there and I contemplated, and I realized, well, all my writing has been more so about unblocking your creativity. So what am I doing teaching web design? I should be making a product or guiding people to unblock their creativity and monetizing that. So I created what I called the Creative Wayfinder, which was a depth psychology-based initiation into creative maturity. Now, this worked out much differently than the web design course because my expertise went much deeper into these topics: Jungian psychology, shadow work, creative bandwidth expansion, embodiment, trauma release, and generating endless motivation. 8 people registered for this group journey. And what was amazing was that they didn't only gain benefit from what I taught them, but from each other, from interacting weekly for 8 weeks as a group. I saw transformations that I couldn't have anticipated. One participant said that his back pain healed by 90% during the course. And after the course, he became dedicated to creating a beautiful garden outside his home, and he's put tremendous creative energy into that. Others unlocked incredible amounts of creative energy and motivation that they hadn't experienced in years. One participant ended up creating the music for my podcast intro, which, by the way, while doing this Creative Wayfinder course, I got 8 episodes into my new podcast. So I myself was finding quite a transformation by teaching the course. You learn a lot more by teaching than by being the student a lot of the time. Now, I also established greater credibility in the creator space. I expanded my audience threefold, and people like Dan Koe agreed to be guests on my podcast. So I was building real relationships with high-level creators, and like I said at the beginning of this talk, a broke artist can create a multi-million-dollar personal network. And there's evidence of that happening for me now because I'm arranging the Creator Economy Convention in Vancouver, British Columbia. You can go to thelivinginternet.com and read all about it. I will explain a little more shortly, but I would highly recommend, if you've got this far in this video, considering that this might be for you. The Creator Economy Convention will have speakers like Dan Koe, spiritual teacher Dan Goldfield, somatic therapist and successful online entrepreneur Brian Meyerhofer. There's a well-known writer who's made over $1 million writing on the internet named Kieran Drew, Hussein Ibarra, lots of really impressive people who are speaking at my event. Now, I realized that my converging strengths and interests were suddenly being leveraged in a more high leverage way than ever before. Doing a podcast, speaking, interviewing people hosting these cohorts, unblocking people's creativity, this was the way to go. Now, for the next 9 months, I'll be doing weekly podcast episodes, and I'll be getting continuously more networked with these high-level people. I'll be making announcements about the convention, and I'll be growing my own audience, and the genie is officially out of the bottle. You know, the creative motivation is on fire like never before. So I'm very excited about this convention. We've assembled a lineup of incredible speakers. Dan Koe has well over 2 million followers across platforms. His book, The Art of Focus, has changed the lives of many and really inspired my entire online creator journey. Talon Simmons, he built a $500,000 a year ghostwriting business and now is building a ghostwriting agency to be a 7-figure agency, and many other incredible people who I'm excited to share announcements about. Now, here's what I really want you to understand. While everyone else is concerned that AI is going to replace their job or replace human creativity, we're building a movement of creators who understand that authentic human connection and psychological wholeness and freedom to travel the world and live your life adventure, this is more valuable than ever before. Irreplaceable, in fact. It's not about just learning some basic business tactic or strategy. It's about becoming part of a community of humans, becoming more human and less like machines. Now, I went from being a depressed, weed-smoking, broke artist to organizing the biggest event of the creator economy in Canada, which is happening June 5th to 7th, 2026. So I highly recommend going and getting your early bird ticket now while they're $200 off. We have 600 seats at the convention, so you'll be in a room full of some of the most incredibly ambitious, creative people who are taking real action to break free from the lack of autonomy that they were taught to have, as we've gone over in this video. Now I'm going to wrap things up here because it's getting dark. You might not even be able to see me anymore. Let's get the light on my face here for this final moment. I hope you enjoyed this. I want you to seize your day. And if you're tired of being a broke artist and you're ready to transform your creativity into abundance, you want to be part of a movement that's defining the future of work and the future of creativity. You found your moment, okay? You watched this far into the video, so the future of the creator economy is being built right now. And if you get your ticket to the Creator Economy Convention, you'll join an online community space where we're already getting to know each other. We're already forming we're forming accountability groups that you can become part of to hold yourself and each other accountable to creative goals and break free. So you can either be part of it or watch from the sidelines. Go to thelivinginternet.com and secure your spot. Now, if you have any questions about the topics I covered in this video, please do go ahead and leave a comment. I'm happy to engage on these topics further. Send me a message if you so please. And just stop making excuses for the good enough or the not so bad life. Don't live a not so bad life. I guarantee you that your excuses are not bigger than the obstacles I've overcome to get this far. The revolution in your consciousness starts today.